Thanks, Philip. So the central recurrent theme in Shakespeare's plays is the tension between truth and deception, reality and appearance, being and seeming. This conflict is a theme to which theater is perfectly suited because theater is deception in service of truth. When I play a character, for example, I'm presenting myself as another human in imagined circumstances, reacting to fictitious events. If I'm acting well, it is true that I'm the character. But it is also true that I am not the character. The American playwright Edward Albee described the interplay of fiction and truth in theater in these terms: a play is fiction, and fiction is fact distilled into truth. Our consciousness that plays are fictions give the lie to the misconception that our ideal experience as an audience is to forget that we are in a theater and that the events on stage are enacted fabrications. When Shakespeare articulates core truths of the human condition, he often reminds us that we are gathered at a performance, that what we are witnessing is an illusion, and that we are all in this moment and in this life together. In his own day, an easy way for him to do that was to have a character refer to the theater itself, a circular three-story structure called the globe. A flag atop the globe proclaimed in Latin that all the world's a stage. And it would seem that to Shakespeare, this was more than metaphor, as one of his characters famously elaborated the thought, all men and women are merely players. In The Tempest, which is generally regarded as the last play Shakespeare wrote by himself, the exiled Duke Prospero has become adept at white magic, and he can create powerful illusions, which he uses in the first acts to deceive former enemies. Later in the play, in a more benign mood, he summons spirits to perform an elaborate wedding pageant in which Greek goddesses bless the marriage of his daughter. When he calls a halt to the festivities, the stage is instantly cleared, and Prospero asks the audience to consider that what they have just witnessed is the ephemeral stuff of life. Just as these celebrations have ended, he says, the whole of our civilization will one day be gone. Even this theater, the great globe itself, will disappear. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on. And our little life is rounded with a sleep. You and I, we are such stuff as dreams are made on. My reality as a dramatic character is illusory, but so is yours as an audience member. We are all actors who disappear. We are all performances that end. We are mortal. In Shakespeare's complex spin on the popular genre of revenge plays, the young Prince Hamlet is especially sensitive to the lies of other characters. In the first scene, he shows up at a wedding party in a black outfit, suitable for one in mourning, and his mood is just as black. Hamlet had idolized his recently deceased father, and the new king, his uncle, has replaced him all too quickly in his mother's bed. The queen reminds her son that all must die, and Hamlet curtly agrees. Then why is it that he cannot accept the inevitability of death, as others do? Why seems it so particular with thee? The word that sticks in Hamlet's craw is seems, and he chokes on it. Seems, madam, nay it is, I know not seems. 'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath, no, nor the fruitful river in the eye, nor the dejected behavior of the visage, together with all forms, moods, shapes of grief that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, for they are actions that a man might play. But I have that within which passeth show. These but the trappings and the suits of woe. My mourning is genuine, and all its manifestations, my clothes, my face, my behavior, are honest signs of my grief, all of which an actor might play. I am not a seamer, Hamlet says. I am not a liar. In 2014, Shakespeare's Globe in London set out to perform Hamlet in every country of the world. And the company, in fact, made it to 197 countries in 2 years. In a book about this adventure, the artistic director of the Globe wrote that Hamlet belonged everywhere, in part because Hamlet is a character restless for truth, unable to bear the lie his present moment is built on, who cannot bear people faking or borrowing their feelings. One can, in fact, sort all the named characters in the play Hamlet in one of two columns. The honest folk who are whom they seem to be, and those who, in one way or another, are deceivers. In the liar column, as it turns out, go all but Hamlet and his trusted friend Horatio. But Hamlet spends much of the play deceiving by playing the madman, pretending to be mad, unless his madness is to some degree genuine, which, as we shall see, is a complicated question. So Hamlet should go into the liar column too. That leaves Horatio, who is so lacking in character in his role as sounding board that one wonders if he really counts. That the list is so radically imbalanced, so many liars, and so few honest folk. Insert that this story takes place in a world of lies. Shakespeare apparently saw the world that way in his darkest hours, just before a mother and her young son are murdered in Macbeth. They have this exchange, occasioned by the flight to England of the father of the family, who has been labeled a traitor. Was my father a traitor, mother? Aye, that he was. What is a traitor? Why, one that swears and lies. And be all traitors that do so? Everyone that does so is a traitor and must be hanged. And must they all be hanged that swear and lie? Everyone. Who must hang them? Why, the honest men. Then the liars and swearers are fools, for there are liars and swearers enough to beat the honest men and hang up them. Hamlet's motives for deceiving others by playing a madman are on the surface sensible enough. Madness is his cover, as he seeks evidence that the new king, his uncle Claudius, in fact killed his father. He lies to protect himself and to mask his progress toward revenge. These motives are more straightforward in the source material, which is a revenge saga uncomplicated by introspection. Among the subtleties of Shakespeare's adaptation of this story are Hamlet's doubts about whether, in a world full of deceit, there is any truth that can be relied on, including the story of his father's murder, told him by his father's ghost, who might really be a devil in disguise, a question which gives this lie-obsessed hero considerable pause. When a touring troupe of players show up at the castle, we learn that Hamlet is a big fan of theater. Apparently, he does not hold it against actors that they are professional deceivers. He cheerily banters with the performers as old friends, and he asks the leading actor to do a speech for him, one that comes into his head because it is about a young hero who is about to kill King Priam of Troy, but hesitates a long moment, precisely Hamlet's own situation, and then finally kills the king, which leads to an outpouring of grief from Priam's wife, Hecuba. As the actor plays the several parts, he really gets into it, as we say, and he is himself visibly moved. When this player exits, Hamlet is alone on stage. He speaks to himself and to the audience, dealing with and his confusion about theater and deception surfaces. How is it that an actor dealing with fictions can have real emotions and can take action, whereas I, who am a real person with a real motive for revenge, do not speak up or take action? If that actor had my true life motivations, he would rock the theater and bring the house down. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I! Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit that from her working all his visage wants, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, and his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit. And all for nothing, for Hecuba. What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty and appall the free, confound the ignorant and amaze indeed the very faculties of eyes and ears. What's wrong with me? Am I a coward? Hamlet works himself into a lather about the wickedness of his usurping uncle and builds to a climax worthy of the revenge anti-hero of any revenge saga. Bloody villain, remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain! Oh, vengeance! I suspect that if his uncle walked in at that moment, he would be impulsively killed. But Hamlet berates his passionate outburst as mere words. he does not yet understand, it seems, that acting is his path to action. But he does decide to make use of theatrical illusion to obtain proof of his uncle's guilt. He'll put on a play in which he inserts a scene that reenacts the murder of his father by poison. If his uncle gets upset, if the scene makes him mad with guilt, that's Hamlet's evidence. The deception of a play will get at the truth. So the play Hamlet is full of theatrical metaphors, and none is more central than Shakespeare's pun on the word act. An act is a deed, but it is also a pretense. One can act, and one can put on an act. Hamlet berates himself for not acting in the first sense, but in the second, he acts all the time. He performs the madman, and in this way he deceives not just the villain, but the whole court, including, in a particularly disturbing way, a girl he has been courting, Ophelia. After the scene in which Hamlet swears an oath of revenge to the ghost of his father, he is understandably distraught, in fact, quite manic, and tells his companions that he will put an antic disposition on. Antics were buffoons who played bizarre and ludicrously odd parts. So we know that Hamlet's performance of madness will be both bizarre and clownish. The very next event in Hamlet's timeline is a silent, disheveled, spooky visit to Ophelia's room in the castle. We do not see this incident, though Shakespeare could easily have staged it. It is instead reported by a very upset Ophelia to her father, to whom she runs immediately after this encounter. "My lord, as I was sewing in my closet, Lord Hamlet, with his doublet all unbraced, no hat upon his head, his stockings fouled, unguarded, and down-jivered to his ankles, pale as his shirt, his knees knocking each other, and with a look so piteous in purport, as if he had been loosed out of hell, to speak of horrors. He comes before me. He took me by the wrist and held me hard." Hamlet stares at her a very long time, shakes her arm, nods his head 3 times, sighs deeply, and exits the room without ever taking his eyes off her. This behavior convinces Ophelia's father, who is the king's chief counselor, that Hamlet has gone mad. The father had ordered his daughter to end her relationship with Hamlet as something above her station in life, and now he dutifully goes to the king to confess that the situation has made Hamlet mad for love. It is in this way that the king first learns of Hamlet's antic disposition. Hamlet's cover is now in place. His mask is madness. I have asked students to imagine the moment just before Hamlet enters Ophelia's private chamber 3 different ways. The first version imagines that Hamlet has come straight from the manic aftermath of his encounter with his father's ghost. His disarray and weird, baffling behavior are manifestations of his actual state, because only moments ago he encountered a ghost, loosed out of hell to speak of horrors, just as Ophelia senses. In the second version, Hamlet arrives well-groomed as usual, the fanciful young prince. Somewhat later, he then proceeds to ditch his hat, muss his hair, unbutton his doublet, untie his garters, roll his stockings down, and put a mad look on his face before entering Ophelia's room. This deception of his former love is all too sane. Hamlet is using Ophelia to get word to the king that he has gone mad. Or is it some meld of the first two possibilities, so that Hamlet's behavior in this scene is both involuntary and performative, out of control and calculated? That third version, in which Hamlet's behavior is simultaneously truthful and deceptive, goes to the heart of the centuries-old debate about the extent to which Hamlet's madness is genuine. Other characters in the play are often uncertain about how much method there is in his madness. So might the audience be uncertain, and so might Hamlet. What actors like Hamlet can do was for Shakespeare a matrix for deception. One of his great villains, who eventually becomes Richard III, speaks of his acting ability as his path to the throne. And he likens himself to Proteus, the mythological shape-shifting deity whose name was used to praise versatile actors of the Elizabethan stage. Why, I can smile and murder whilst I smile, and cry content to that which grieves my heart, and wet my cheeks with artificial tears, and frame my face to all occasions. I can add colors to the chameleon, change shapes with Proteus for advantages. Can I do this, and can I get a crown? Were it farther off, I'd pluck it down. Richard III is a masterful deceiver, as are Shakespeare's other antiheroes. What these fellows have in common is the advantage of being outsiders. Like all outsiders, they are acute observers and critics of insider foolishness and hypocrisy. From the sidelines of Shakespeare's plays, even as they struggle to get center stage, they remind us that many accepted and patriotically polished truths are in fact sham. And they argue that society and the status quo are based on lies. One of Shakespeare's greatest comic characters is Sir John Falstaff, the vice-ridden ne'er-do-well of the Henry IV plays. His tavern world is an alternative universe to that of the court, and from his perspective, conventional morality is often grounded in deceit. Falstaff has a sharp nose for bullshit, and he disdains the lies of the powers that be. It is not that Falstaff is a truth teller, he is himself full of lies, but his dishonesty rises at times to a form of protest. When Falstaff finds himself on the battlefield, for example, he is very reluctant to engage in combat in the comic manner of all cowardly braggarts. Young Prince Hal, before rushing back into the fray, chides him for not joining the fight. Why, thou owest God a death. 'Tis not due yet, Falstaff replies. I would be loath to pay him before his time. And yet Falstaff knows that from his court's point of view, he is morally obliged to fight. Honor pricks me on. Nay, but how if honor prick me off when I come on? How then? Can honor set to a leg? No. Or an arm? No. Or take away the grief of a wound? No. Honor hath no skill in surgery then. No. What is honor? A word. What is in that word, honor? What is honor? Air. Honor. Who hath it? He that died a Wednesday. Can he feel it? No. Can he hear it? No. 'Tis insensible then? Yea, to the dead. But will it not live with the living? No. Why? Distraction will not suffer it. Therefore, I'll none of it. And even Falstaff hopes that his friendship with the Crown Prince will gain him some insider privileges at the court. To that end, he will flatter and recite pieties like any sycophant. Tony Kushner's Angels in America, arguably the greatest American play of the last 3 decades, is as much preoccupied with truth and deception as anything by Shakespeare. It is a play, for example, in which the marriage of 2 central characters is held together by a web of lies. Both resist the truth because truth means change. Lies stabilize the marriage, which is a microcosm of the way in which lies provide social stability and are a source of power. In the play, Roy Cohn, a villainous outsider who in real life was a mentor to the young Donald Trump, is diagnosed with AIDS by Henry, his doctor, who is well aware of his patient's closeted homosexuality. Roy challenges his diagnosis. Your problem, Henry, is that you are hung up on words, on labels, gay, homosexual, lesbian. You think they tell you who a person sleeps with. But they don't tell you that. Like all labels, they tell you one thing and one thing only. Where does a person so identified fit in the food chain, in the pecking order? Not ideology or sexual taste, but something much simpler. Clout. Not who I fuck or who fucks me, but who will pick up the phone when I call, who owes me favors. That is what a label refers to. Now, to someone who does not understand this, homosexual is what I am because I have sex with men. But really, this is wrong. Homosexuals are not men who sleep with other men. Homosexuals are men who, in 15 years of trying, cannot get a pissant anti-discrimination bill through city council. They are men who know nobody and who nobody knows, who have zero clout. Does that sound like me, Henry? No. I have clout. A lot. I can pick up this phone, punch 15 numbers, and do you know who will be on the other end of the line in under 5 minutes? Not the president. Better. His wife. I don't want you to be impressed. I want you to understand. This is not sophistry. And this is not hypocrisy. This is reality. I have sex with men, but unlike nearly every other man of whom this is true, I bring the guy I'm screwing to Washington. And President Reagan smiles and shakes his hand because what I am is defined entirely by who I am. Roy Cohn is not a homosexual. Roy Cohn is a heterosexual man, Henry, who fucks around with guys. And what is my diagnosis, Henry? AIDS is what homosexuals have. I have liver cancer. The nexus of power and lies, or alternative facts, is something that the cynically conservative Roy Cohn acutely understands. In the world of Angels in America, truth entails change and movement, whereas lies mean staying the same and staying put. That is, staying in power. Roy Cohn's objection to his diagnosis is, from another perspective, a question of identity. And this brings us back to Hamlet, who at the outset of his play could be mistaken for an anti-hero outsider. He distances himself from the celebrations, makes snide remarks from the sidelines, and in his first soliloquy, he begins to spew his disgust with the whole court. He doubles down on his outsider status when he starts playing the madman. Certainly, the trauma of his idolized father's sudden death and his mother's hasty remarriage have shaken him to the core, and his understanding of his world has been thrown into question, including his sense of himself. But below the surface may lurk a deeper confusion about his identity. The royalty in Shakespeare's plays have a difficult time growing up because their actions and statements are never challenged by the many who flatter them. Flattery is deception. And the consequence for princes is that they are deceived about the truth of everything, including themselves. They grow up with selves so underdeveloped as to be non-existent. Richard II, for example, begins his journey toward personhood only in Act 5 after he is deposed. It is possible, then, that the reason Hamlet does not act sooner is not that he thinks about things too much or cannot make up his mind. He does not act because there is no actor there. That is an existential and a theatrical solution to the so-called problem of action in Hamlet. One of the world's most famous characters does not exist, does not have an identity, at least until quite late in the play. For all that he cries out as he jumps into Ophelia's grave, "It is I, Hamlet the Dane," he is not really Hamlet because his identity is a pretense. He has failed to be. Hamlet is a lie. King Lear, who is 80-something, is the most elderly example of a Shakespearean royal who is lacking in identity. That he is capable of infantile tantrums and grandiose self-deceptions is not a matter of second childhood so much as arrested development. In an ancient myth, which the play King Lear echoes, an old king goes to the river to bathe. And while he is in the water, his clothes are stolen. And no one will believe that this naked old codger is the king. He wanders hither and yon and learns a great deal about what really goes on in his kingdom. The lives of his poorer subjects are a revelation to him. In Shakespeare's play, Lear abdicates his throne and goes mad, encounters a beggar whose naked condition prompts him to strip off his royal robes and to reflect at all that he has been blind to. His madness is, in fact, a new sanity. Lear's worldview transforms into a radical reversal of conventional justice. A man may see how this world goes with no eyes, hark with thine ears, see how yon justice rails upon yon simple thief, hearken thine ear, change places, and handy-dandy, which is the justice? Which is the thief? It is those in power who are the real criminals. But the powerful hide their sins under their fine attire. The poor are prosecuted because their ragged, tattered clothing, full of holes, make their vices visible. Through tattered clothes, small vices do appear. Robes and furred gowns hide all. Plate sin with gold, and the strong lance of justice heartless breaks. Armored in rags, a pygmy's straw doth pierce it. There are more references to clothing in King Lear than in any other Shakespeare play because it is a motif for deception. Clothes lie. Nakedness reveals the truth. In the world of this play, clothes must be stripped away if a man is to get at the truth of others and of himself. But seeing the truth will be perceived by those in power as madness. What passes for sanity is living with deception and using it for advantage. Those who are ascending in King Lear are all liars. Why had Lear been blind to the truth of the world before his awakening? Because he grew up flattered in an alternative universe, a Lear tower, where everything he said and did was right. They flattered me like a dog and told me I had white hairs in my beard, and the black ones were there to say aye and no to everything that I said. Go to! They are not men of their words. They told me I was everything. 'Tis a lie. In that mad moment of sanity, Lear acknowledges that his grandiose sense of himself was a sham. In his last moments, Lear continues his late life struggle with truth and deception. He enters the stage howling, carrying the limp body of his daughter, Cordelia, who has been hanged. stones. Had I your tongues and eyes, I'd use them so that heaven's vault should crack. She's gone forever. I know when one is dead and when one lives. She's dead as earth. Lend me a looking glass. If that her breath were mist or stained the stone, why then she lives. He knows that she is dead. And yet, can we fault him for denying the truth when the truth is unbearable? And my poor fool is hanged. No life. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life? And now, no breath at all. I'll come no more. Never. 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 Pray you undo this button. Thank you, sir. Do you see this? Look on her. Look. Her lips. Look there. Look there. He dies at that moment in the illusion that Cordelia is alive. Even as he asks everyone on stage and in the audience to look, he dies still blind to what he cannot bear to see. We lie to ourselves when the truth is too terrible. As a central figure in Angels in America remarks, I usually say, fuck the truth. But mostly, the truth fucks you. This character's AIDS-afflicted body, covered with lesions, disgusts and terrifies his partner, who cannot bear to be honest about his reaction. One reason to lie to others is that sometimes speaking the truth would be brutal. The human condition makes deception necessary at times, or at least excusable. Ibsen's Peer Gynt is a modern character in search of selfhood who assumes one identity after another. In the course of his life, Gynt fancies himself a scholar, then a lascivious prophet. While tricked into incarceration in an asylum, he is crowned emperor by madmen. At one point, he becomes wealthy as a shady businessman and slave owner. Then he becomes a fur trader in the New World and later a gold panner. Toward the very end of his existential journey, after barely surviving a shipwreck, he returns home penniless and hungry. He is crawling, gathering wild onions, and then he stops to peel one, musing about the stages of his life as layer after layer comes off the onion. This occasions a great epiphany about the truth of his identity. Of the earth you came, and one day or another you'll have to return. Meanwhile, you have to fill your belly but wild onions for the emperor of beasts. You're not an emperor anymore, old fool. You're an onion, Peer Gynt, and I'm going to peel you. The outer layer's all mussed and broken, like a shipwrecked man hanging on. Under that, the passenger, grizzled, scrawny. He still tastes like Gynt, a little tang. Next is me when I pan for gold. Juice is all gone, if it ever had any. A coarse layer with hard skin. That's the fur trapper up at Hudson Bay. This one could be a crazy crown. No thanks. Here's the fellow fancied himself a scholar. Not much there. And here's the prophet, fresh and juicy, with a musky stink. Brings tears to my eyes. Now a fat, soft layer. Must be the gentleman. And yes, it's rotten underneath, streaks of black. Black slaves. And the black ink of my prophets. All these layers, on and on. Where's the kernel? The heart of me just gets smaller and smaller. And it's gone. Nothing at the core. Nothing. Life's little joke. As Peer Gynt discovers, or perhaps admits, the truth that he has no core, no identity. Gynt's onion and his lies to himself throughout the play remind me of anthropologist Jules Henry's description of the circle of sham in his Pathways to Madness. If we imagine our social contacts as a series of concentric rings, then absolute truth is requisite and healthy only in the innermost circle, whereas the outermost is the circle of sham, where concealment and pretense are the best policy, and truth would be absolute stupidity. With each move outward from the innermost circle, relationships become more and more fraudulent. Peer Gynt has lied not only to those in his innermost circle, but to the person at the very center of his life, himself. Dante reserved the lowest circle of hell for the treacherous, but betraying oneself, lying to oneself about oneself, is surely some hellish region. But that part of hell is the landscape of the human condition for those who accept that we are all of us onions, that there is no core, no kernel. In the introduction to his translation of Peer Gynt, Rolf Fjelde quotes Erich Fromm. If the modern age has been rightly called the age of anxiety, it is primarily because of this anxiety engendered by the lack of self. What if the very notion of self is nothing more than a social and cultural construct? Perhaps the hollow men of our time are a new phenomenon only in that modern man has become aware of the absurdity of his existence and has discovered, along with Gynt, the illusion of selfhood. If that is the case, then those who insist on the sham of being themselves, must be living a lie. Even so, society predicates selfhood as a necessary ground for holding us responsible to one another. In Shakespeare's day, Puritan objections to theater often included the fact that actors assumed false identities, which was rightly perceived as destabilizing of conventional perceptions about who is who. It would be easiest for the courts if identity were fixed. But if psychologists like Dan McAdams are right that self is the narrative that ties together and gives meaning to autobiographical memories, and if the changing narrative of selfhood can radically reinterpret supposedly objective events, then truth is problematized. And certainly truth about identity. At best, any claim I make to selfhood would be provisional. This is me at the moment. And yet, most of us sense we have a self, however unstable. Theater provides a metaphorical solution. Ibsen's onion image echoes the Greek image of Dionysus, the god of theater, as a series of masks without a face. What if, like Dionysus, a man has no face beneath the roles he plays? From this perspective, selfhood consists in an endless performance of serial selves, since one man in his time plays many parts, sure as Shakespeare, and also of coexisting selves, which can be graphed in a Venn diagram of interlocking versions of ourselves. Each of the selves we play is quite distinct, and we are all capable of improvising and rehearsing new versions of ourselves, just as actors are able to create new characters that are and are not themselves. If there is no face behind my many masks, then to be honestly myself can only mean to perform each of my various and evolving selves as truthfully as I can. And yet, I must lie. The multiplicity of my selves engages me in a kind of lying. I do not let the people in this part of the Venn diagram of myself know what these others can know. I certainly hid parts of myself from my parents growing up, for example, and that seemed essential to becoming a person who could move in very different and wider circles. So the self I perform in one of my circles, however honestly I perform it, is in part a lie. Working with plays has taught me that any question of truth versus lies is likely to be complicated by ambivalence. The opposites which help actors embody the human condition are rarely good versus evil or good choice versus bad choice. Inner turmoil is typically occasioned by two conflicting goods, which pose a dilemma. An honest case can be made for each choice because there are pluses and minuses on both sides. The pluses attract and the minuses repel. This, of course, puts a character in a bind, a vicious circle of vacillation. She's damned if she does, she's damned if she doesn't. Actors professionally practice this perversity of creating characters who are in conflict with themselves, as all substantive center stage characters must be. Existence is ambivalence. This perspective suggests to me that any serious discussion of truth versus lies cannot be a good versus evil choice. It should be more like the model that serves actors. A case can be made for both. And we must struggle to decide in every case where on the spectrum of truth and lies we ought to land. This includes issues which ask us to weigh the reality of the status quo against visions of what is not yet true, which are always at risk of seeming delusional. In the spirit of honesty, I must confess that my experience as an actor has prejudiced me in favor of the unreal. When I am acting well, the fictional events and circumstances and relationships, even impossible illusions, feel very real, more real than life. Some of the best moments of my life have been fictional. On stage, I have done all manner of things that I cannot do in real life. I've also been a better person. I have behaved more honestly, compassionately, bravely. I have felt more deeply and perceived more profoundly. I've also said and done a lot of terrible things on stage with conviction. But the opportunity to walk in other footsteps has developed sympathies and understandings that have helped me grow as a person. What is behavior modification, after all, but rehearsal so as to perform differently? In that respect, living and acting are pretty much the same. And that's no lie. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Lee's previous lecture showed how easily children can deceive adults. And Mr. Mann's lecture showed that we tend not to question our deceivers sharply enough. That was brought up in the discussion. It seems that that theme runs through Shakespeare, from everything from Much Ado to Twelfth Night, etc. That characters are very easily deceived. They take the first impressions first reports that are told to them without questioning the veracity of the deceivers. Do you find that that is a theme in Shakespeare and in life? And if you find that that's true in life, how do you take advantage of it as an actor, that the audience is so willing to be deceived?
Well, to return to the fact that this question is the wonderful province for theater, because theater is about appearances. It's all appearances. So it makes sense that Shakespeare would populate the world with people who are reacting to appearances. At the same time, he knows that what the audience knows, which is that they're quite aware of the fact that they're seeing actors as well as characters, that ambivalence. Cognitive psychologists are now talking about the cognitive blend of witnessing performance, that you're always seeing actor/character. You know, your question puts me in mind of a thing by a theater critic, Michael Goldman, in a book called The Actor's Freedom. And he talks about the terrific energy of theater. And by terrific, he means the root sense of terrifying. And the example he gives is a young boy in a village somewhere, and Uncle Joe puts a lion's skin over his head and acts out the lion. And the child is terrified. The child knows that this is Uncle Joe, but it is also kind of like a lion, and it's perhaps the slash between Uncle Joe and the lion that's particularly terrifying. And that's an energy that any playwright can rely on. Yes, thank you. Yes.